Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our fourth installment of our Community Leadership Series, generously sponsored by the First Energy Foundation. Whether this is your first time joining us or this is your fourth, you are truly in for a treat today. Craig Teamer is absolutely one of my favorite people in this community, and I'm excited to have him with us and to learn more about the Toledo Port Authority. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat area, and I'll be sure to get those over to Craig this afternoon. So Craig Teamer currently serves as Manager, Finance, and Special Projects for the Toledo-Lucas County Port Authority. Born and raised in the Old West End neighborhood of Toledo, Ohio, Craig is an alumnus of St. Francis de Sales High School. He received his BBA in Finance from the University of Toledo in 1998, his Executive MBA from Bowling Green State University in 2004, and his CPA qualifying certificate from Owens Community College in 2014. Craig has worked in the corporate finance and banking industry for over 20 years. Most recently, he worked as a senior treasury analyst for the Andersons, Inc. Previously, he served as an assistant vice president at Huntington National Bank in the special assets division. And prior to that, he served as a commercial lender at Fifth Third Bank and Key Bank. He has held various finance positions at Dana Corporation as well. Craig was a recipient of the Toledo 20 Under 40 Leadership Award in 2014. His involvement with the African American Leadership Council of the United Way of Greater Toledo, including serving as a co-chair of AALC, co-chair of the Strategic Partnerships Committee, as a member of the Real Men Ready Steering Committee, and as a liaison on the Community Impact Cabinet. His past volunteer activities include serving as a board member of En-ROADS Northwest Ohio, Leadership Toledo, the University of Toledo Joint Committee, Toledo Excel, and Springfield Schools Foundation. He has served as Director of Educational Affairs, Treasurer, and Vice President for the Alpha Xi Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. He currently serves on the Board of Trustees for the University of Toledo Alumni Association and the Audit Finance Committee for the United Way of Greater Toledo. He is married to Stephanie Teamer, and together they reside in Holland, Ohio, with their 3 children, Justin, Jalen, and Kendall. Phew, what a mouthful. Busy guy. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speaker for today, Craig Teamer.
Helps to take it off mute. Appreciate that, Danielle. Feel like I need some theme music after that. I am the same gentleman who's in the picture, sans the bow tie and now the scruffy beard, but I'm excited and honored to be here today speaking to everyone. As a former alum, LT alum, as well as my wife, it's exciting to see how the organization has adapted during this time with COVID and with this community leadership series. So hats off to Anna, Elizabeth, Nikki, and Danielle for all their assistance in making this a success. The Port Authority is a huge supporter of Leadership Toledo. Obviously, I went through LT before my time here, but we have support with I guess we're current and past class members. Some of them may be on this seminar today. So the Port is a big supporter and a proponent for Leadership Toledo. Can't believe it's been 20 years that I went through Leadership Toledo, and it seems just like yesterday. I still keep in touch, obviously, with the organization and for those that were in the class with me. So Leadership Toledo is an organization that I hold near and dear to my heart. Lastly, a big shout out to my wife, Stephanie, who, as I mentioned, is an LT alum, probably my biggest cheerleader. So I want to make sure I acknowledge her. And then our 3 wonderful kids, Justin, Jalen, and Kendall, who said, "Dad, you'll do a great job, just don't do anything corny." And then Kendall, who's our 8-year-old, says, "Dad, anytime I have to do anything big or a presentation, I just pray." So with that being said, I think my kids and my wife and then extended family appreciate all their support. I am going to share my screen. Let's see, there we go. So I figured before we kind of get into the presentation and talk about the port, I thought it made sense maybe to revisit the core values of Leadership Toledo, and you kind of figured these are the core values that are driving the presentation that you have heard and will be hearing, right? So we've got lead, which is becoming more a confident leader. Hopefully you had an opportunity to listen to Sarah Best, as well as Max Lambden. So Sarah with the Secret of Leadership, and then Max Lambden with the Unwrapped Leader. There we go. Did a great job talking about lead, right? So connect, which is the theme that I'll be talking about, and then as well as the wonderful Ambria Michaelogic, who will talk more about how to win at making connections. Connect, becoming more connected to your community. Grow, right? So we're growing stronger in our self-awareness, being able to identify blind spots and where we can improve. Rodney Eason, Sarah Scow will tackle grow. And then lastly, serve, identifying service that is meaningful to you. Christy Jenkins and Eugenia Marlowe will follow those. So as an LT alum, whether you went through the class or you're an associate of the organization, I think it's safe to assume that these core values play a role in everyone's leadership development. So these kind of serve as a true north, and I figured it probably made sense just to revisit these as we move on. So let's pivot toward connect, right? So connect is the theme, at least for this presentation today. And I figured probably the best way is, let's pull some definitions from the dictionary, right? And so we kind of get a good level set on what connect is. So a couple of different definitions, right? One is to become joined, right? So quote unquote, you're connected at the hip, right? So that's one definition. Another one is to make a successful hit, shot, or throw. So for Miami Heat fans out there, unfortunately, they had to watch Anthony Davis and LeBron James connect on several shots for them to win a championship. So that's another definition for connect. Another one is to have or establish a rapport. Usually people use that in the form of, we're really connected, right? We had a good vibe. So it's a mental, it's a social connection, right? And then lastly, connect, to establish a communications connection, right? So we're connecting via the internet or connecting on the telephone, right? But if you look at all those definitions, the main theme that kind of flows through all of them is that one, connect is a verb, right? So it implies action and relationship. So it's difficult to connect by yourself and without doing anything. So whether we like it or not, we're all interdependent. We are all connected, right? It's really no way to, that we would probably champion the person who can stand on their own and not need anyone else's help, but that's probably not a likely story. So you need to do something, right? So connect. You need to make a move to connect with someone or something else. So you say, Craig, that's great. We're talking about connect. What does that have to do with the Port Authority, an organization that's been around for 65 years? And I say, I'm glad you asked. So this presentation will be a little different than the ones where we talked about lead, where this will be a little bit more informative, but I want to draw a good connection of how the Port Authority, of what it does and how it connects with the community. Why do we say more than a port, which is the title of the presentation and adorns the left side of each PowerPoint slide, is more than a port. We want everyone to know that we're in a community. We want them to better understand, and we want them to see that we're more than a port. And I think we'll get more into that and how that affects the community. And then lastly, from a personal perspective, I just want to provide some tips on how you can become better connected with the community. I think Ambria is going to, obviously with her experience, is going to do a great job and provide a lot of tips. Just a couple of things that are probably just personal to me in relation to Leadership Toledo and how I got connected. So that being said, we have our first poll question, and if I can, let me go back. There we go. All right, so we're going to launch our first poll question, which is, how would you classify your knowledge level of the Port Authority, right? So high, right, you are an expert, medium, mildly familiar. If you were in a corner, you could do a 30-second elevator speech. or low, which is hardly familiar. And what exactly does the Port Authority do? So we'll take, I'll give it a couple more seconds to see where everyone lands. All right, we're getting there, we're getting there. A couple more seconds. And we'll stop there. So if I shared results, it looks like a slim minority are high, and those are probably some of my colleagues who are on this on this presentation right now. So I want to make sure I do well by them. But where the numbers are falling are kind of where I expected, which is kind of in that medium to low, which is great. So this will be a great opportunity to distill 65 years of existence of the Port Authority and see if I can cover that under an hour. So that is the goal for today, and I appreciate everyone sharing their thoughts on the poll. And also, if you have questions during the presentation, I think Danielle will kind of monitor that. Put those in the chat and she'll jump in where applicable and ask those questions. And obviously, hopefully I can answer those questions on the spot. If not, I'll definitely come back around and do that. So let's go back to there we go. So before we dive to a little bit of the history, most folks may be aware that this region was initially very attractive to others due to, being near a lot of waterways, so the Maumee River, the Lake Erie, the canals, the railroads. So transportation has always been a big part of the background for Northwest Ohio, specifically Toledo. Surprisingly enough, transportation is still a big draw for a lot of companies that decide to locate here due to proximity to I-75, I-80-90. We've got access to waterways and access to bigger markets. So with that being said, that plays a lot into the background of why the Port Authority was created. We were founded in 1955. So the Port Authority is the first Port Authority to be created in the state of Ohio. Currently, there are 67 port authorities in the state. So when you think of these bigger port authorities, obviously Toledo, we're the first. Cleveland has a port authority, Columbus, kind of Cincinnati, Dayton, Akron, Canton. Some port authorities manage transportation assets, and we'll get more into that. Another term you may commonly hear is the finance authority. So a lot of the other port authorities that were created after Toledo probably focus more on the finance end, but from a port authority, we've kind of covered all the bases relative to managing transportation assets and also providing some other services. So I wanted to make sure I kind of pointed that out. Most other port authorities are created to address a certain economic need within the region, right? So they kind of stay within a certain region, and that's why they're developed. The reason why the Port Authority was developed in '55 was in anticipation of the St. Lawrence Seaway opening in 1959. So the expectation is there'll be a lot of international shipping coming through the Atlantic, making its way down the Seaway and into the Great Lakes. Port Authority was created to be able to capitalize on that. Our business is transportation and development. It's shaped by a mission to move people and cargo while employing innovative programs. And then lastly, there is a foreign trade zone. As I talked about, a lot of expectation that some international travel and trade would come through. Foreign trade zone is established to help defer, reduce, or eliminate U.S. customs duties. So as we'll talk about some of our facilities, international shipping come through, those items can kind of stay there and, kind of not avoid having to deal with customs. Our mission statement, every good organization has a mission statement. I won't read it verbatim, but what I like to do is I try to paraphrase when people say, well, what exactly does the Port Authority do? I like to say we specialize in managing and controlling assets, which move people and products all under an umbrella of economic development. That's kind of my simplistic way of trying to say this. And the development part is very important. That's why we are more than a port. And so you can see the three areas where we focus on, which are maritime, aviation, and development. A little bit, just a quick organization overview. These are 2018 numbers. We have, from an asset perspective, on our balance sheet, about $286 million of assets on our balance sheet. And then you look at our operating budget, yeah, by close to $17 million. And you can see the split between airport and then seaport development in terms of where that goes. Also want to note that we leverage so levy funds. So there's a local levy that we benefit from. And then we also try to utilize state and federal grant funds. So we're trying to leverage dollars in order to deploy and improve the assets and economic development. So I want to make sure I make that point. If you look at us from a revenue perspective, the Port Authority is probably more like a small to medium-sized business. But from an asset perspective, we have over $250 million of assets on our balance sheet. So you look at that, and then you see we have 35 people in the organization supporting all those assets. You see we run pretty slim. And so we're a hardworking group. Make sure I want to acknowledge my coworkers, but we try to do what we can and work very hard to support the Port Authority's mission. Led by Thomas Winston, who just wrapped up his first year of being CEO for the Port Authority. I know a lot of you are familiar with Thomas. From a governance perspective, we have a 13-member board. 6 are appointed by the county, by Lucas County Commissioners. 6 are appointed by Toledo City Council, and then 1 is jointly appointed. So we've got 13 in all staggered terms, so no one rolls off at the same time. But that just gives you an idea, an overview of what we do. So I think the easiest way to talk about the Port Authority, and we'll talk about the Seaport and Airport first, is probably from a timeline or sequential perspective, right? We've got 65 years that we try to cover, but if I hit some of the highlights in each decade, I think it'll kind of give you an idea of how the Port Authority has grown over time, right? So I think the first one is, as we sit on the banks of the Maumee River down here at the Port Authority on this rainy Thursday day, is to talk about the Seaport. And so if you look and go towards the mouth of the Maumee River as it meets the Lake Erie, the Port Authority built its overseas shipping facility in the 50s and 60s, about 110 acres. A constant theme that you will hear that how we initially built and kind of operated this, but now we have operators in place that have helped to manage our assets, right? So we may own the assets, but we put competent operators in place who we think will do a great job managing these assets for us. So Midwest Terminals is our partner as it relates to Facility 1 at the mouth of the Maumee. With Facility 1, as you see all the ships that kind of go up and down, I'm usually making stops there. We can handle cargo and transfer from ships to rail to truck. We have all the necessary equipment to make that happen. But this is kind of the first thing that the Port Authority built on the 50s and 60s to support its effort. Next, we built some and coal docks. So if you envision, and I'll give you a link to a map, but kind of towards the north and northeast of Facility 1 are these ore and coal docks, which were built in the 1960s. And little did I know is that Toledo back in the 60s was like the largest coal port in the world. So we shipped over about 35 million tons of coal in 1966. Obviously, those numbers have come down, but you can see the importance of that ore and coal dock, which now CSX operates on our behalf. So we utilize a lot of rail, or CSX utilizes a lot of rail to offload that coal and iron ore, which can be sent across the Great Lakes or even internationally. So that was kind of the second part of developing the Seaport. Next, and we've had probably some recent news in this probably earlier this year, is our dredge disposal facility, which we commonly call Facility Number 3. This was something that was developed by the Army Corps of Engineers back in the 70s. Since that time, the Port Authority has kind of acquired a couple of pieces and expanded it as well. But the whole idea of a dredge disposal facility is to handle dredge. And for those of you who may not be familiar with dredge is essentially the silt and sediment at the bottom of the river, which is kind of scooped up, which provides, easier access for shipping channels to come down the Maumee. And this needs to happen on a periodic basis to make sure that ships don't get stuck, right? So ships want to be able to traverse the Maumee River and make their deposits. The Port Authority has put money into expanding this. I think last year we got about close to a $2 million grant from the state to further expand this. One of the benefits of expanding this disposal facility is that previously the Army Corps of Engineers and other contractors would dredge the bottom of the river, and then they would do something called open lake dumping, right? So scoop it up and dump it somewhere else, which is kind of frowned upon. And so actually Ohio law was enacted that says instead of doing open lake dumping, you've got to put it in a controlled facility. So that's where the Port Authority, in conjunction with the Army Corps of Engineers, and others kind of came into place. What happens is that our disposal facility provides an opportunity for storage and also for other uses for dredge material. Primarily could be used on farms, and there's some other experimental techniques that are being utilized right now. But this is one of our, one of our good assets in terms of trying to provide some innovation. Joe Capel, who's currently in the Leadership Toledo class, can talk all day about the dredge disposal facility and worked very hard to secure that grant. Moving next, shipyard. So not too far from the Veteran Skyway Bridge, you'll see the Toledo Shipyard, which has actually been in existence since, probably over 100 years. So the Port Authority purchased the shipyard in 88. Little known fact, George Steinbrenner, who's the former owner of the Yankees, was a former owner of the shipyard. So it obviously predates the port. So there are only, I think, 4 shipyards on the Great Lakes that are able to handle ships. And obviously we have one in Toledo. Ironhead Marine is the operator. And as you can see, we can accommodate a vast number of vessels on the Great Lakes. So the next one, to kind of wrap up the Seaport, you may recognize this picture because it looks a lot like the Great Lakes Maritime Museum, which is what it is now. We played a part in developing what used to be the Marine Passenger Terminal in 2007, which eventually became the Great Lakes Maritime Museum. If you think of the Marina District now, this was probably one of the first vertical developments and projects in the Marina District, which has, as of lately has grown a lot with the Marina Lofts and then kind of the Metro Park. So it's pleasing to see a lot of good development along the Marina District, but wanted to point out that back in 2007, we played a part in that. So just to wrap up on Seaport, just a couple of statistics. We have the largest landmass seaport in the Great Lakes. We've got 15 terminal operators. If you are kind of measuring from the mouth of the Maumee River up to about I-75, so the DeSalle Bridge, kind of all those operators. About 12 million tons of cargo annually, and that can consist of coal, aluminum, petroleum, aggregates. You got access to railroads and direct connections. I think the most noteworthy thing about the Seaport, and this kind of gets to the heart of connecting, the Seaport supports about $700 million of annual revenue and about 7,000 jobs for the region. So when you think about that, and my folks may not go to the Seaport, but you think of direct jobs, and you think of those folks are spending their money to support other businesses. And so we did a financial and economic study on the Seaport and came up with these numbers, so which is massive. So you think of all the support that the Seaport does for the community, it's kind of right there for you. And then lastly, there's a link called www.tourtheport.com. Feel free to take a look at that website. It'll give you a good overview of the Seaport. You can see all the different terminals. It's a good kind of aerial view of the Seaport. So we talk about Port Authority. You hear port, so you got Seaport, and then airport is kind of the other one, right? So the city of Toledo, which technically still owns no longer just the Toledo Express, now it's the Eugene F. Krantz Toledo Express Airport, and then Toledo Executive Airport, which used to be called Metcalf Field out in Lake Township. So back in the 70s, so we've moved from establishing the Seaport and expanding all that. Now we move into the 70s. And the Port Authority kind of took over managing Toledo, Eugene F. Krantz Toledo Express, and then Toledo Executive Airport. And so if you go out there, these facilities are home to plenty of businesses and services, employing thousands of people. There's passenger services, aviation services. Definitely from an economic perspective, just as important from the Seaport. But just to underline the transportation assets that we kind of manage, this is one that is under our purview. And so you think of the 180th Fighter Wing, the Ohio National Guard, they're out there. Toledo Public Schools, they have an aviation academy, and then there's also business services out there as well. So definitely trying to kind of scale up and grow up the airport, but very important in our portfolio. So we've kind of moved through kind of the 70s, and now we'll talk about our financing programs, which this is where we're kind of more than a port, right? So we have those transportation assets, and now we're going to talk about the financing assets. And this is kind of the area where I work in. So here's a list of kind of the different programs that we have. And the story behind our financing programs is kind of in the late 80s. We decided to kind of branch out and be able to provide access to capital to businesses. And so over that time, since kind of the late 80s, we've done close to 600 projects, close to 20,000 jobs in terms of having a hand in creating, and then over $2 billion of investments. And so these programs, and we'll talk about those as we dig more into these programs, are a big reason why we've been successful in providing access to capital. So our bond fund, for bigger businesses, our SBA 504 loan program, State of Ohio 166, DCAP and micro lending, which are more specialty, and then our Better Buildings in Northwest Ohio. First, let's talk about the bond fund. If we think about a continuum of capital, the bond fund is up top relative to the size of the deals and the type of borrowers that we assist with. This was created in '88. It's the first bond fund created in the state of Ohio. And we've done probably close to $360 million in projects through the bond fund, especially with this year where we've done a pretty substantial amount of deals. And it's rated A- by Standard & Poor's. We can do tax exempt bonds and taxable bonds. Just to keep it real simplistic, tax exempt bonds have lower interest rates, while taxable bonds that have higher. But the idea is that based on the type of bonds that we issue, they're fixed rate, right? So you can do a 20, 25-year deal. So really no need to worry about rate issues. And you can see the different type of projects which we can support, going from nonprofits, going into governmental, do manufacturing, warehouse and distribution, and machinery and equipment, and then corporate headquarters. So if you look on the next slide, you may recognize some of these names that have utilized our bond fund to either construct facilities or corporate headquarters. So Dana Corporation, Owens Corning, the Andersons, which is my prior employer, Cleveland Cavaliers. You say, oh, Craig, that's not part of Northwest Ohio. What are they doing there? Another thing that we do as a port authority, I mentioned some of the other ones in other parts of the state, is that we partner together. So there may be opportunities where a deal may be too big, right? Our sweet spot is between $3 and $10 million. If a deal is too big, we can partner with other port authorities to bring a project to fruition. So the Cleveland Cavaliers is a great example. We helped finance their practice facility. So we partnered with a couple of the port authorities. I believe we did Cleveland as well as Summit Akron to provide some financing. So not uncommon for us. Our footprint is Northwest Ohio, but we do work outside of the area, partner with other port authorities. So we move down to the next level, which is our kind of 166 and SBA 504, right? So these are similar programs, but probably more on a smaller scale. And once again, access to capital is the name of the game. Regional 166 program, we are the local administrator. We can help manufacturers, distributors, and wholesalers. The biggest loan we can do is up to $500,000. And this is partnering with other banks. So this is partnering with banks in both of these programs where we can provide access to capital. The benefit here is that there's a fixed interest rate of 3%, right, which is pretty attractive even by today's standard. And then similar to that program is the SBA 504 loan program. We can do loans up to $5.5 million, once again, partnering with other banks. Terms probably needs to be updated. Terms can be up to 25 years. They can do machinery and equipment. And then these also have a low fixed interest rate. And for those of you who may be familiar with the Port Authority and familiar with Lori Cantrell, so obviously you're my colleague and does a great job of ministering and providing these programs as well. Let's see, Better Buildings of Northwest Ohio. Think of how can you finance energy savings and energy improvements on a building, right? And here's one way to do it. And we call it, PACE financing, which means property assessed clean energy. Here in our program, we call it Better Buildings in Northwest Ohio. So that's kind of our trade name. But it provides up to 100% financing for energy improvements. So we can do lighting, HVAC, roofing, insulation, windows. We can do up to 15-year terms, may do a little longer. We could do project size as small as 5,000. And we've done projects up to this one, $7 or $8 million, right? So we can do any project size and scale it up. Repayment is not through traditional principal and interest. Repayment is basically a special assessment placed on your property. So just like you own a home and you have property tax placed on your home and you pay, semi-annually, kind of the same thing for our Better Buildings program. An assessment is placed on your property, remitted through the county, and eventually we get paid. So it's an interesting way to finance some energy improvements on commercial properties. And we also have rolled out a program for residential properties as well. And you see we've done over 150 billion improved with close to $46 million in funding since that time.
So Craig, I have a quick question for you from the
Sure.
chat box.
Yep.
So it says that the port does partner within Ohio on the Northwest Ohio Bond Fund. Do you guys partner with any adjacent states?
So good question. So by law, the Port Authority is regulated to the state of Ohio, right? And so if you ever want to look at the Ohio Revised Code and some light reading, it's kind of the Bible for the Port Authority. So we cannot partner with adjacent states. We can do everything within the state, but cannot go outside. So that's kind of prescribed by law.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any additional questions? That was a good one.
That's it for now.
Okay. So we've talked about better buildings. Let's talk a little bit about our specialty programs. With DCAP, which was established in 2010. And the whole impetus behind DCAP was providing access to capital to minority and women-owned contractors who did not have the capacity to participate in private and public construction projects. And so you can see the idea is these are contractors who are kind of starting up or just trying to get established or have been established and just don't have the capacity to juggle multiple projects because they don't have that access to capital to help them purchase materials, purchase supplies, and or tackle expended labor while trying to bid on other projects. So this was a kind of an innovative program. And simplistically, it's a revolving loan fund, about $600,000 to help fund expended labor, materials, and supplies. Since inception in 2010, and we tracked this pretty closely, we've approved about $7.1 million of DCAP deals. So you think of how being able to leverage that, which initially started out as $400,000 and has since grown to $600,000. That has been able to be leveraged up to $7.1 million, provide access to capital to minority and women contractors in Northwest Ohio. We also assist contractors with bonding, we kind of partner up to provide them access there. A couple of other qualifiers, making sure that businesses are authorized to conduct business in the state of Ohio. They must be certified as MBE, WBE, and must demonstrate a financial need. So we have done over 100 projects. I think we are about 45 participants, and just being able to leverage that $600,000 up to, it's probably close to 7.1 or $7.2 million, just trying to make an impact within the local area. Another specialty program is our microlending program. So the Port Authority partners with ECDI. For those of you familiar with ECDI, they're based out of Columbus, Ohio. They are the largest microlender in the state of Ohio and probably the second or third largest SBA microlender in the country. And as microlender, as the name kind of specifies, smaller loans, right? So these loans on average, probably $15,000 to $20,000. We talk about, once again, I mentioned this kind of continuum of capital, right? We've got this bond program that provides between up to $10 million of financing. We have our SBA 504 and 166 that does, probably addresses more of those more established companies that have been in existence for at least 2 years. And then we kind of get down to this micro lending where it's primarily startups, right? And whether it's a brand new business or there's some credit issues and may not need as big of an amount as an established company, right? So we're trying to hit this whole continuum of from big to small, and right? And so it's created to address the needs of aspiring entrepreneurs and small business owners, providing access to capital for startups and businesses who may not qualify for conventional bank loans. And that could be for a myriad of reasons. As I mentioned, could be credit score, could be risk of the business, could be collateral. And so this relationship that has kind of resolved or resulted in over $1 million of loans to myriad of borrowers, I think kind of fits in that piece, right? And you can always do more, right? Some people only need $500 or $1,000 or $1,500, right? But ECDI has been a great partner. The Port Authority kind of serves as a point of contact and then works with the borrower to get them everything they need so that they can apply for an ECDI loan. So that's kind of the space that I work in from a financing area, but shows that, you know, this is kind of another step of us being more than a port. So kind of coming into the home stretch here, talking about brownfield redevelopment, right? So now we've talked about the 50s and 60s, 70s, 80s, and now kind of the early 2000s, the Port Authority got involved in brownfield redevelopment. Think of brownfield redevelopment. Here's a couple examples down here, but these are properties that may be enticing or interesting to a developer because of where they are located. As I mentioned and we talked at the outset, Toledo has a lot of access from a geographic perspective with highways and waterways. But these parcels of land have some environmental challenges. And for developers to take on those environmental challenges is probably cost prohibitive to them. So one of the areas where the Port Authority can step in is that they can purchase and take hold and title of these properties and try to remediate them so that they can become marketable and provide opportunities for businesses to build upon, provide jobs. So this is something that's kind of been entered in at the turn of the century. Back in 2002, you see, took on responsibility for doing what I just explained: purchase, cleanup, and redevelopment. And since that time, I've done over about 350 acres of property and put it back into productive use. You see the Gulf Oil Chevron refinery site kind of on the east side, about 182 acres, former Toledo Coke site, and then the G Parkway site, which we call Overland Industrial. We'll talk more about that. That's probably the one that we've probably marketed the most. Here's a picture of kind of the Gulf Oil or the refinery site in 2014. We put about $24 million total investment. And I mentioned before that we tried to do a good job of leveraging not only Port Authority dollars, but local dollars and state dollars and federal dollars, right? So we think that's our specialty of trying to put on those different hats to bring in different cash flow to help with redevelopment. This marine terminal is now, you know, I guess Ironville Marine Terminal, once again, is operated now by Midwest, but, you know, obviously did not look like this, you know, at the beginning. Think of a kind of a blank palette over a canvas, and now you see rail, you see a lot of development going on there. So, you know, purchased in 2008, operated in 2014, so it does take time. These aren't projects that are done overnight, but it does take time. But obviously at the end, you've got a property that's developed and productive and can provide jobs and support for businesses. Most people might remember this. You see the kind of the stack in the back, the Willys Overland, that this is the old Jeep site, right? The old Overland Willys Jeep site. The Port Authority purchased this in 2010. We did the remediation, once again, leveraging local, state, federal dollars to remediate the land, and ended up building a spec building, about 100,000 square feet, and kind of rechristened this Overland Industrial Park. And for those of you who are not familiar with spec buildings, you construct a spec building, but you don't have an end user in mind at the outset, right? So this is a risk. This is a risk that the Port Authority took to construct this spec building, the expectation that someone would move in and take this over. 2010, if you recall, economically it was a tough spot, tough year, but decided to take a risk and do that. Lo and behold, 2016, Dana announced that they were going to build an axle plant. They needed a facility, and as it worked out, our spec building was a great fit for Dana, and so they became the first tenant at Overland Industrial. And you see a kind of a picture of the Toledo Drive line. So I mentioned we built a 100,000 square foot building. Dana added another 200,000 square foot for their axle plant. So this facility now, which is located, you know, if you think of Central and Detroit, kind of outskirts of the Old West End, 300 jobs are at this facility, right? So once again, redevelop, build, and now you've got repurposed for business, right? So Dana ended up being the first tenant there. Not too long after that, Detroit Manufacturing for Russia, they built a facility. You can see that in the picture. They built a facility at the Overland Industrial Park. Their building or their business employs 300 people, right? So another opportunity. This continues to expand. Another expansion at Overland, we had All Phase Electric. They built a facility in 2018. So I believe we just have 2 parcels remaining at Overland. See, I think either 1 or 2, but just a classic example of how redevelopment from a brownfield perspective has been beneficial, we think, to the community, and an opportunity to provide businesses, provide jobs, and help the surrounding area. And then lastly, from a brownfield, and some hopefully have read or maybe heard about this. So Cleveland Cliffs, they announced plans to build a HBI, which stands for hot briquetted iron production facility at our Ironville terminal. So construction began in 2018, and they should be in the final throes of completing the project. But this is a $700 million project, looking to 1,200 construction jobs. And if you see, from I-75 or from the river, huge crane that they put together, and having 1,200 construction jobs, with the expectation that obviously there would be some permanent jobs there. But this is probably our most recent example of brownfield development locally. So let me pause here. Danielle, any questions at this point before I kind of move on?
We are good to go.
Okay. Just a couple of major milestones from a development perspective. So we say, wow, the Port Authority, you guys, have an airport, you manage a seaport, you've got brownfield redevelopment, you do financing, and then we've got some city parking garages, right? So we purchased in 2011 the city parking garages, Vistula, Port Lawrence, and Superior, and they resumed operation of on-street parking meters. So once again, here's an opportunity for the Port Authority to kind of serve various stakeholders. And we're talking about addressing parking availability and other areas where we felt like it was a good fit. So we do manage that as well. Greyhound, as well as Amtrak, operates out of our Martin Luther King Plaza, which is off Emerald Street off of Broadway. This is, probably don't talk too much about this, but you think from a rail and then from a transportation perspective, we own this property as well, which also has facilities for businesses. So we do rent out space as well. But just another example of kind of managing those transportation assets. And then probably lastly, from a development, One Government Center, we purchased in 2018. The whole impetus behind this is the Port Authority is able to manage this asset and then kind of maintain and operate the facility in a high quality manner. So Brian Purrs and his team, and Brian is also a former LT alum, does a great job kind of managing our facilities and a lot of stuff that we do and keeps him busy. So with that, I think I'll move on to our final poll question. And that is, if I can pull it up. Oh, there we go. For some reason, it won't let me. It will not let me maximize. I'm trying to get to the poll question. How about that? There we go. All right. So poll 2. So after all my rambling, hopefully, when you think of the Port Authority, what comes to mind, right? So there's Seaport, airport, economic development, access to capital. What words come to mind? And hopefully this is a layup. And if I didn't do a good job, then hopefully that'll come through. But hopefully with this presentation, it gives you a flavor of what the port does, right? So we'll give a couple more seconds of what we do. And perfect, so we'll end polling and share the results. So looks like the majority of everyone says, hey, the Port Authority, all of the above. You know, when you think of Port Authority, think of Seaport, think of airport, economic development, access to capital. We truly try to become more than a port. And when that's kind of a recent marketing theme and tagline, we think it's emblematic of what the Port Authority does and what it tries to be. And like I said, we want to continue to be innovative. So lastly, before I end, I want to, there we go. Provide just a couple of personal tips, and this is kind of just aside and separate from the Port Authority, but there are just a couple of tips I wanted to share as it relates to connecting, right? And we've talked about how the Port Authority connects, and just personally, just some thoughts on how maybe you can connect if you're looking to connect and get more involved in the community. The first thing I think is identifying your passions, and that could take the form of sitting down, piece of paper, you know, whiteboard, and just kind of writing down what it is that you are passionate about. Some examples could be you're passionate about leadership, you're passionate about equal access for all, you're passionate about literacy, fighting hunger, education. The bottom line is what makes you tick, right? For the Port Authority, it's helping the community and being able to draw economic development and make sure that everyone can benefit. Personally, identify what your passion is. Second, what are your talents and how can you leverage them to help others in the community? Essentially, what are you good at? Can you effectively lead? Can you raise funds? Are you an extrovert who likes to be around others and not afraid to engage others? Are you an artist? There is a place for everyone. That's probably the one thing that I've learned in my 44 years on this earth, is that there's a place for everyone. Some people just find it earlier than others, but the point is, keep looking. Everyone has talents. Everyone is good at something, and you can leverage them. There's a lot of need out there. Third, identify opportunities. What are the needs? A lot of organizations are doing work. How can you plug in? Or do you create something brand new, which is always being an opportunity to innovate, right? So identify those opportunities. And if you sit down and identify your passions and look to see what opportunities out there, you'll probably find a lot of white space out there for you. And then lastly, make yourself aware and available for opportunities. And this is probably personally where Leadership Toledo played a role in me. When I went through the class in 2000, Karen Landis, who was the executive director at the time, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Craig, we would like for you to serve on the board." This was the first board that I had served on and was kind of green, and actually felt like, why would she pick me? Like, what is it about me that she feels like I could serve on the board, right? A lot of it was being aware and open for opportunities. And sometimes we do a better job than others of making sure that we are being self-aware of what's out there and what we can do. But you have to be open to the opportunities. And thanks to Karen Landis and subsequently Dave Schlaudecker, had opportunity to serve on the board, become president, and meet a lot of amazing colleagues and people, and that has helped me as I moved from different employers and different volunteer organizations. So just make yourself aware and available for opportunities. As someone very wise told me, how about a slow yes instead of a quick no, right? So slow yes instead of a quick no, to make yourself aware and available for opportunities. Now that you are connected, you are leading, you are growing, and you are serving, right? So make sure you maintain those core values as you move through your life. With that, I end. Danielle, any questions or anything else that I need to cover?
Well, I have a personal question. So does the port have any future projects that you're working on that you can share with us?
So there are a couple, probably the biggest project, I say biggest, but most recent. So downtown continues to be a hotspot, right, of activity. And so the old Park Inn Hotel, which is going to be rebranded as a Hilton Garden Inn Homewood Suites, through work with the county, and then I think Frank Cass, Continental out of Columbus. So they're working to, it's like a $60 million project the Port Authority is providing some financing through our PACE Energy program. So we're issuing some bonds to help with the energy retrogrades and energy savings for that project. So that's about a $9.5 million project that actually just closed today. We closed on that project today. So the Port Authority, obviously from a region perspective, we try to keep our fingers in our region, but it's exciting to see some of the things that are going on downtown. And so we're playing a big role in that. And then there's some other things that hopefully will be released soon, or some other projects that we're working on. So this has been a very busy year on all fronts. And I'm not talking just financing, but development or buildings. Like we've been pretty busy and pretty fortunate. And as I mentioned, those 35 individuals that help us run Lean do a heck of a job of making sure that the Port Authority lives up to the mission of the organization.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much. I just want to thank you, Craig, so much for taking the time to provide such vital community information with us today. I know my mind is blown. I knew very little about the port and its role in our community. So I thank you for taking that time to share the information with us. So I didn't share at the beginning. My name is Danielle Johnson, and on behalf of Leadership Toledo, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you've learned something new, just as we have here on staff, about Toledo and about the Toledo-Lucas County Port Authority. So we're going to put a couple links in the chat box for you today. So there'll be a link for a survey. If you would be so kind as to fill that out, we would greatly appreciate that. Just a quick reminder, we do have another session scheduled for Thursday, October 29th at 12 o'clock. You'll hear from Ambria Nikolajczak on how to win at making connections. This will be another great session for our community leadership series, and the link is in the chat box. And then lastly, if you joined us for the first two sessions, you heard a little bit from Sarah Best of Real Good Ventures, and she is planning to offer a deeper dive into emotional intelligence and predictive index. So if you are interested in joining Sarah for those sessions are on October 20th, October 27th, and October 28th. And the link to sign up for those are going to be in the chat box as well. And all the proceeds from those sessions will go to benefit Leadership Toledo. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Craig, so much for blowing our minds this afternoon. And we look forward to continuing to work with you and appreciate your advocacy for Leadership Toledo. So, and for all you do in our community.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, everyone. Have a great day.